Winter had quietly settled over Fairview. Snow rested gently upon the rooftops of Maple Street, turning the little white house into something that looked as though it belonged inside an old Christmas postcard. The porch light still glowed every evening. Elizabeth's rose bushes slept beneath a blanket of snow. Smoke drifted lazily from the chimney as Noah added another log to the fireplace. The house no longer felt empty. It felt alive, not because Henry Collins was still there, but because pieces of his kindness still found new ways to welcome people home. Nearly 2 years had passed since the mysterious letter had found Emma. Every Thursday afternoon, Henry Collins' writing room filled with people, teachers, veterans, children, grandparents, young parents, complete strangers. Some came to write letters. Others simply came to sit quietly beside Henry's old writing desk. No one was ever rushed. No one was ever asked why they came. Some people left smiling. Others left with tears. Almost everyone left lighter than when they had arrived. On one snowy Saturday morning, David arrived carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. He found Noah standing in the hallway staring toward the attic stairs. "What are you looking at?" Noah smiled. "The only place Grandpa ever defeated me." David laughed. "The attic again? I thought we'd already cleaned it." "So did I." Noah held up a small notebook. "I found one of Grandpa's old checklists. Every room inside the house had been crossed off. Kitchen, living room, basement, garage, workshop, garden shed. Then, one final line remained blank. North attic storage." David raised an eyebrow. "I've lived here almost 50 years. I didn't even know there was a north attic." Henry had never wasted space. If he labeled something, it existed. The 2 men climbed the narrow staircase once more. Past the familiar attic they had cleaned months earlier, they discovered a much smaller wooden door hidden behind several old shelves. Dust covered its handle. A tiny brass key still hung from a hook beside it. Henry had labeled the hook North Storage. Noah smiled. Only Grandpa would leave the key exactly where it belonged. The old lock opened with a soft click. The door creaked slowly inward. A cool breath of dusty air drifted into the hallway. The room beyond was much smaller than the main attic, barely large enough for a few shelves. Unlike the rest of the house, nothing inside appeared disorganized. Every box carried neat handwritten labels, Christmas lights, camping equipment, Elizabeth's quilts, repair tools. At the very back, hidden beneath a folded canvas blanket, sat a single wooden box. No label, no date, no explanation. It was different from everything else Henry owned. The oak had darkened with age. The brass hinges were polished bright. Someone had clearly opened it many times. Yet, a thin layer of dust suggested it hadn't been touched for years. David carefully lifted it onto a nearby table. "It's heavier than it looks." Noah noticed something carved into the lid. Not words, just a tiny teddy bear, one ear stitched together. "That's unusual." David nodded. "I've never seen Dad carve anything like that." Neither of them opened the box immediately. Henry had taught them something over the years. Objects connected to memories deserved patience. Noah gently brushed away the remaining dust. Tucked beneath the brass latch, folded almost invisibly, was a small cream-colored card, written in familiar blue ink. Henry's handwriting. Noah unfolded it carefully. Only one sentence appeared. "Please don't throw him away. He still has one child waiting." The room became perfectly still. David read the words again. Then again. "He. Who's he?" Noah slowly opened the wooden box. Inside, resting on soft white cloth, lay an old teddy bear. Its golden brown fur had faded from years of love. One glass eye reflected the winter sunlight. The other showed tiny scratches. Its left ear had been carefully sewn back together using dark blue thread. One arm carried several patches. The stuffing had settled unevenly over time. It wasn't beautiful. It wasn't valuable. It certainly wasn't new. Yet, someone had cared for it with extraordinary tenderness. Noah gently picked it up. The bear still smelled faintly of lavender. And something else. Baby powder. David smiled sadly. Dad repaired him. You can tell. Every stitch had been sewn by hand. Patiently, carefully, lovingly. As Noah turned the bear over, something crinkled inside. He frowned. Did you hear that? David nodded. There's something in it. Hidden inside a tiny pocket beneath the bear's patched arm, Noah found a folded piece of paper, no larger than a business card. Its edges had yellowed with age. Henry's handwriting covered only one side. He wasn't brave because he stopped being afraid. He was brave because he smiled anyway. No name, no date, nothing else. David quietly whispered, "Whoever owned this bear must have meant a great deal to Dad." Noah hugged the little bear gently, for reasons he couldn't explain. Holding it felt strangely comforting, as though years of hope had somehow soaked into the worn fabric. The afternoon sunlight shifted across the attic floor. As Noah lifted the bear toward the window, he noticed tiny faded letters embroidered inside one foot, almost impossible to read. He squinted, very carefully. The name slowly appeared. Buddy. So, David smiled softly. His name was Buddy. Noah laughed. I think Grandpa named everything. Just then, a small envelope slipped from beneath the white cloth lining the wooden box. Unlike the first note, this envelope had never been opened. Across the front, Henry had written only 4 words. Open only when smiling. David frowned. What does that mean? Noah looked from the envelope to Buddy, then back again. I don't know, but Grandpa never wrote anything without a reason. Neither man opened it. Instead, they carefully placed the envelope back inside the box. If Henry had written instructions, they intended to honor them. That evening, the snow fell more heavily. Emma stopped by after school to help organize new stationery in Henry's writing room. The moment she noticed Buddy sitting on Henry's desk, she walked over slowly. Without saying a word, she gently touched the bear's repaired ear, then smiled. I think he's been loved. Noah looked surprised. How can you tell? Emma pointed toward the uneven stitches. Nobody fixes something this carefully, unless they hope it'll make someone smile again. Those words lingered in the room. Noah looked at Buddy differently now. Perhaps this wasn't simply an old toy. Perhaps it was another unfinished act of kindness, waiting, just like the letter had. Before Emma left, she turned back toward Noah. My teacher says, objects don't have memories. She smiled gently. I think she's wrong. Noah watched the little bear resting quietly on Henry's desk. Outside, snowflakes drifted past the window. Inside, Buddy seemed almost to be waiting for someone, waiting for one more child, waiting for a promise Henry Collins had never forgotten. As Noah turned off the desk lamp, a tiny tag sewn beneath Buddy's collar caught the light for the first time, barely visible, almost hidden by years of wear. On it, only one handwritten sentence remained. Return me when another child needs hope more than you do. Noah stared silently. His heartbeat quickened. He whispered to himself, Grandpa, whose bear was this? The next morning, the first rays of sunlight reflected off the fresh snow that covered Maple Street. Everything looked brighter, cleaner, quieter. Inside Henry Collins' writing room, Buddy rested exactly where Noah had left him the night before. The little bear sat on Henry's old oak desk beside the fountain pen. Its patched ear caught the morning light. Emma's words still echoed in Noah's mind. Nobody fixes something this carefully unless they hope it'll make someone smile again. He couldn't stop thinking about it. David entered carrying breakfast. I had a feeling you'd be here. Noah smiled. I've been looking at Buddy for an hour, and I think Grandpa wanted us to discover him now. David poured coffee into 2 mugs. Why now? I don't know, but everything Grandpa left behind always seemed to appear exactly when someone needed it. Noah carefully picked Buddy up once more. For the first time, he noticed how professionally the torn ear had been repaired. The stitches weren't rushed. Each one was nearly identical. Tiny, but easy, almost invisible. Henry hadn't simply fixed a toy. He had restored something precious. As Noah gently brushed away a little dust from Buddy's fur, he noticed another detail. The bear's right paw had faded much more than the rest. The fabric was almost smooth, as though someone had held that paw. Every single day, for a very long time, Emma arrived shortly after school. She placed a fresh bouquet of white daisies beneath Henry's photograph, then immediately walked toward Buddy. Good morning, she whispered to the bear. David smiled. You talk to stuffed animals? Emma shrugged. They listen better than some people. Everyone laughed. She gently held Buddy's tiny paw. This part is almost worn away. Noah nodded. I noticed that too. Emma smiled thoughtfully. Someone must have held his hand every night. The room suddenly became quiet. No one had thought of it that way. That afternoon, Noah wrapped Buddy carefully in a warm wool blanket. I think it's time. Time for what? David asked. To visit Arthur. Whitmore Stationery looked exactly as it always had. The little brass bell chimed softly above the door. Arthur Whitmore looked up from repairing another fountain pen. When he saw Noah carrying the blanket, he smiled politely. Then Noah gently folded the blanket back. Buddy appeared. Arthur froze. The screwdriver slipped from his fingers. It landed quietly on the wooden counter. His eyes widened. For several long seconds, he couldn't speak. Finally, he whispered only one word. Buddy. Noah looked surprised. You know him? Arthur slowly removed his glasses. His hands trembled slightly. I haven't seen him. For almost 12 years. He carefully walked around the counter. Not toward Noah. Toward Buddy. Almost like greeting an old friend. Very gently, Arthur placed one finger on the bear's repaired ear. I remember sewing this. David blinked. You repaired him? Arthur smiled sadly. No, Henry did. I only found the matching thread. Arthur looked at the patched ear for several moments before speaking again. It happened the week before Christmas. He burst through this door carrying Buddy. He wasn't worried about himself. He wasn't worried about the snowstorm. He kept saying, Arthur, please help me find blue thread. He has to be ready before tonight. Arthur chuckled quietly. I asked, who's he? Henry looked at Buddy and answered, a little boy's best friend. The shop became completely silent. Arthur slowly carried Buddy toward a chair by the fireplace. He sat down carefully, holding the little bear on his lap, as though he were holding something alive. I offered to repair him myself. Arthur said, but Henry refused. He smiled. Then he told me something I'll never forget. Children know the difference between something repaired and something repaired with love. Emma smiled softly. That sounds exactly like Grandpa Henry. Arthur nodded. It does. He opened one of the old display cabinets. Hidden inside was a faded photograph. He handed it carefully to Noah. The picture showed Henry sitting on the floor beside a hospital bed. A little boy, perhaps 7 years old, sat beside him, wearing blue pajamas. Buddy rested comfortably between them. The little boy was laughing, really laughing. His eyes sparkled, despite the IV line attached to his arm, despite the pale skin, despite everything. Noah whispered, who's he? Arthur looked at the photograph for a long time. His voice became softer. His name was Lucas Bennett. He came into my shop once. Arthur continued. He wasn't interested in toys. He wanted crayons. I asked him why. He smiled. Then he said, Buddy gets scared at the hospital. I'm drawing pictures so he won't be lonely while I'm sleeping. Emma quietly covered her mouth. Arthur smiled through tears. That little boy worried more about Buddy than himself. David looked again at the photograph. He looks happy. Arthur nodded. He always smiled, even on the difficult days. Noah remembered the tiny note hidden inside Buddy. He wasn't brave because he stopped being afraid. He was brave because he smiled anyway. So Grandpa wrote this about Lucas. Arthur nodded. Yes. Arthur stood, walked toward a small wooden cabinet, unlocked the bottom drawer, and removed an old leather notebook. Across the cover, Henry had written, Hospital Thursdays. Arthur carefully opened it. Each page described a different visit, different children, different stories, different small acts of kindness. Henry never wrote about illnesses, only people. One page contained only 3 sentences. Arthur read them aloud. Lucas asked whether stuffed animals become lonely. I told him only when children stop hugging them. He hugged Buddy for almost 5 minutes without saying another word. Emma wiped away a tear. Arthur smiled gently. Henry always knew. Children didn't need perfect answers. They needed someone willing to imagine hope with them. Noah slowly turned another page. A photograph slipped onto the table. It showed Lucas standing outside the children's hospital. Snowflakes drifted around him. Buddy wore a tiny knitted red scarf. Henry stood beside him, laughing, both of them making snow angels. Written beneath the picture, in Henry's handwriting, were 5 simple words. His happiest day this winter. Noah smiled. It must have been Christmas. Arthur slowly shook his head. No, it was. The day Lucas found out, he wasn't getting better. The room fell into complete silence. No one moved. No one spoke. Outside, snow continued falling softly beyond the shop window. Arthur gently touched Buddy's repaired ear once more, then looked at Noah, that little bear. He whispered, was about to teach Henry Collins the greatest lesson of his entire life. The following Thursday, Noah stood outside Fairview Children's Hospital. Snow had melted overnight. Small patches of green grass peeked through along the sidewalks. Children's laughter drifted from the therapy garden. Parents hurried through the entrance carrying backpacks, blankets, and stuffed animals. Life moved quietly here, balanced somewhere between hope and heartbreak. Buddy rested carefully inside Noah's canvas satchel. His tiny patched ear peeked out just enough to be seen. Every few minutes, Noah reached down to make sure the little bear was still there. Not because he feared losing it, because, somehow, carrying Buddy felt like carrying part of Henry. The hospital lobby had changed over the years. Fresh paint, brighter windows, new artwork filled the walls. Yet one familiar corner remained exactly the same. The little reading area Henry had helped create many years earlier. A bookshelf, a rocking chair, a colorful rug covered with stars. Children still gathered there, some reading, some coloring, some simply resting beside their parents. A volunteer arranging books looked up. Her silver hair was tied neatly beneath a blue scarf. When she noticed Buddy, she stopped instantly. One hand rose slowly to her mouth. No, she whispered. It can't be. Noah smiled gently. Are you Susan? The woman nodded. You knew Henry Collins? A tear escaped before she could answer. I knew him every Thursday. Susan carefully walked toward Buddy. She didn't touch him immediately. Instead, she smiled the same way someone smiles when unexpectedly seeing an old friend. I haven't seen him in so many years. She whispered softly. Hello, Buddy. Noah introduced himself. I'm Henry's grandson. Susan's eyes filled with warmth. I've been wondering when one of you would come. You were expecting us? Susan laughed quietly. Henry expected everything. He once told me, if kindness is real, someone will eventually come looking for its story. She invited Noah into the reading corner. Children nearby continued turning pages as if nothing extraordinary was happening. The room smelled faintly of crayons, fresh books, and warm chocolate from the hospital cafe. Susan pointed toward the old rocking chair. Henry sat there every Thursday. He always arrived 20 minutes early. What did he do? Noah asked. Susan smiled. He listened. That was all? Most of the time. She explained that Henry rarely began conversations. Instead, he waited. Children eventually spoke when they felt safe. Sometimes after 5 minutes. Sometimes after 5 weeks. Henry never hurried them. He believed silence deserved patience. Susan said. And children always knew when patience was genuine. As Noah listened, he imagined his grandfather sitting quietly in the same chair, holding Buddy, waiting, not trying to fix sadness, only refusing to leave it alone. Susan reached beneath the bookshelf. She removed a small plastic storage box. Inside were dozens of faded photographs. Many showed children smiling beside volunteers. Others captured birthday parties, holiday celebrations, magic shows, picnics in the hospital garden. Then, she found one photograph wrapped separately in tissue paper. Henry, Lucas, Buddy, and 6 other children, all sitting cross-legged on the colorful rug. Each child held a stuffed animal, every one of them smiling. What was happening? Noah asked. Susan laughed through tears. Thursday Club. Thursday Club? Henry invented it. Every Thursday afternoon, any child who felt frightened could bring a stuffed animal. Henry would speak to the toys first, never the children. He'd ask, "Who's feeling brave today?" The stuffed animals answered first, through Henry's voice. Sometimes Buddy spoke, sometimes rabbits, sometimes dinosaurs, sometimes dolls. Soon, the children began answering too, not as patients, as friends. Susan smiled. It sounds silly, but it changed everything. Many children found it easier to admit their fears. When pretending Buddy had asked the question, Noah looked down at the old bear. His worn paw suddenly made perfect sense. Hundreds of frightened little hands had probably held it. Hundreds of quiet conversations. hidden inside years of soft fabric. Susan opened another folder. Inside were handmade drawings. One immediately caught Noah's attention. A child's drawing showed Buddy standing like a superhero, wearing a red cape. Above him, written in uneven green crayon, were the words, "Buddy protects dreams." "Lucas drew that," Susan said. "He insisted Buddy work the night shift." The night shift? He believed Buddy stayed awake, so children could sleep. Emma would have loved that story. Noah smiled without realizing it. Susan continued. There were nights when Lucas couldn't sleep. He'd whisper into Buddy's ear. I asked him what he was saying. Lucas answered, "I'm giving him my scary dreams. He's stronger than I am." Noah quietly closed his eyes. For a moment, he couldn't speak. "Grandpa never told us." Susan nodded gently. "Henry never talked about what he did here. He believed kindness lost something, if it needed applause." Just then, a familiar voice echoed across the hallway. Well, I wondered when Buddy would finally come home. An elderly man wearing a hospital maintenance uniform approached slowly. Walter Harris. Though retired, he still volunteered every Thursday. His smile widened the moment he saw the little bear. Walter chuckled. "I've been looking for that old rascal." He gently scratched Buddy's patched ear. "I remember this fellow better than some of my old co-workers." Noah laughed. "Everyone seems to know Buddy." Walter nodded. "Ozan, you have no idea." Walter leaned against the windowsill. "I used to lock the hospital every Thursday night. Henry was always the last visitor to leave. Not because he stayed too long, because he made sure no child felt alone before he went home." Walter's eyes drifted toward the pediatric wing. There was one winter evening. The snowstorm had shut down half the town. Families couldn't get here. Roads were closed. Some children spent Christmas Eve without their parents. So what did Grandpa do? Walter smiled. He unpacked every stuffed animal he could find. He gave each one a name, and he spent the entire night introducing them to one another. He stayed all night? Susan nodded. Until sunrise. The nurses begged him to go home. He refused. Then Walter quietly repeated the sentence he had never forgotten. No child should wake up believing Christmas forgot their room. Noah looked toward the window. Outside, snowflakes had begun falling once again. Soft, gentle, almost exactly as they had years before. Walter suddenly became thoughtful. There was one thing Henry never understood. "What?" Noah asked. Walter smiled sadly. He always believed he was helping Lucas. He shook his head slowly. The truth was, Lucas was teaching Henry how to be brave. Silence settled over the reading corner. Even the children nearby seemed unusually quiet. Walter reached into his jacket pocket. He removed a tiny laminated visitor badge. The photograph had faded almost completely. Across the top, it read, "Volunteer Visitor, Henry Collins." On the back, in Henry's familiar handwriting, was a sentence Noah had never seen before. "If I ever stop coming, let Buddy finish the visit." Noah stared at the words. His throat tightened. For the first time, he realized Buddy had never been just a toy. He had been Henry's promise, that no frightened child should ever face the night alone. Snow covered Fairview once again. From the children's hospital window, the town looked peaceful, almost magical. Tiny white flakes drifted gently past the glass. Inside, the pediatric wing glowed with colorful paper snowflakes, handmade ornaments, and strings of warm Christmas lights. Every volunteer tried their best to make the hospital feel less like a hospital. Henry Collins believed something even more important. Children didn't need perfect decorations. They needed reasons to smile. Susan carefully carried a small leather journal into the reading corner. She placed it in Noah's hands. "I've never shown this to anyone. It belongs to your family." The journal looked older than the others. Its leather cover had softened from years of use. Unlike Henry's usual notebooks, this one had no title, only a tiny drawing. "Buddy," smiling. Inside the front cover, Henry had written one sentence. "Some stories are too precious to tell until someone is ready to carry them." Noah swallowed quietly. Perhaps that someone was him. He turned the first page. The date read, December 18. Henry's handwriting was steady. "Lucas asked me something today." He looked out the window for a long time before speaking. Then he asked, "Mr. Henry, do people forget children who die?" Noah stopped reading. His chest tightened. Even Susan closed her eyes. She remembered that afternoon. Henry had written his answer beneath the question. I told him, love has a terrible memory. It refuses to forget. Lucas smiled. I don't think he believed me. The room became very quiet. Children nearby continued reading books. Parents whispered softly. Life moved forward. Yet inside the journal, time stood completely still. Several pages later, Henry described another Thursday. Lucas had been weaker. Walking exhausted him. Even holding a crayon required effort. Yet, Buddy never left his side. Henry wrote, Today Buddy attended tea time. Lucas poured pretend tea into tiny plastic cups. He apologized because the tea was invisible. I told him invisible tea tastes the sweetest. He laughed so hard the nurses came running. Susan smiled through tears. I remember that. He laughed for nearly 5 minutes. It echoed through the whole hallway. Noah smiled too. For a brief moment, Lucas no longer felt like a tragic story. He felt like a little boy, exactly as Henry would have wanted. Another page. Another Thursday. Henry had drawn a tiny star beside the date. Whenever he drew stars, something important had happened. Lucas asked if Buddy ever becomes tired. I answered, only after carrying someone else's fears all day. Lucas hugged Buddy tightly. Then he whispered, tell him he can rest when I'm brave enough. Noah quietly looked toward Buddy. The little bear rested beside the journal. His worn paw, his patched ear, his faded smile, suddenly carried a weight words could hardly explain. Christmas Eve arrived. The journal described the hospital as unusually quiet. Many families had gone home. Others couldn't travel because of the snowstorm. Lucas remained. So did Henry. Henry wrote, I asked Lucas what he wanted for Christmas. He thought for almost a minute. Then he answered, I don't need toys. I just don't want anyone to spend Christmas alone. Susan covered her face. I'll never forget those words. He was only 7. That evening, Henry organized an unexpected Christmas party. Not because there were gifts. There weren't many. Not because there was expensive food. There wasn't. Instead, every volunteer brought something simple. Homemade cookies, old board games, storybooks, paper crowns, coloring pencils. Someone played an old piano in the hallway. The nurses sang Christmas songs slightly off-key. Children laughed anyway. Lucas insisted Buddy receive his own Christmas stocking. Henry played along. Inside, he placed a tiny knitted red scarf, made by Elizabeth, small enough for Buddy. Noah looked up. Grandma knitted the scarf? Susan smiled. She stayed up half the night making it. She said, every guest deserves to feel warm at Christmas. Buddy wore that little scarf for the rest of the winter. Every child wanted to touch it. Every child believed it was lucky. Henry never corrected them. Maybe he believed it too. Near the end of the journal, Henry described the moment he would never forget. Christmas morning, before sunrise, Lucas asked Henry to wheel him toward the hospital window. Snow covered everything outside. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Finally, Lucas broke the silence. Mr. Henry, promise me something? Anything. Henry had written. Lucas looked down at Buddy. Very gently. He stroked the bear's worn paw. When I don't need Buddy anymore, please don't let him stay in a box. Henry stopped breathing for a moment as he read those words years later. Even now, Noah felt his own eyes fill with tears. Lucas continued. Somewhere, another child is probably scared tonight. Buddy already knows how to help. Henry answered without hesitation. I promise. The journal page ended there. Nothing more. Only a single ink stain where Henry's pen had rested too long. Perhaps the only place in all his journals where tears had reached the paper. Noah slowly turned the next page. It was blank. Then another. Blank. Until finally, one final page remained. Across the center, Henry had written only one sentence. Some promises take years before the right child appears. Susan gently closed the journal. He kept that promise. For 12 years. He repaired Buddy whenever the fabric wore thin. He brushed his fur. He even talked to him sometimes. Walter smiled from the doorway. I caught him once. You did? Walter laughed softly. He thought nobody was watching. He picked Buddy up and said, Don't worry, old friend. We'll know when it's time. Noah looked down at the little bear resting quietly beside him. For 12 long years, Henry had waited, not because he couldn't let go, because he had made a promise to a little boy. On Christmas morning, that Buddy would one day comfort another frightened child. Perhaps that day was finally drawing near. As Noah carefully lifted Buddy into his arms, he noticed something hidden beneath the bear's tiny red scarf. A folded piece of paper, different from every note they had found before. The handwriting wasn't Henry's. It was larger, uneven, written by a child. Across the outside, only 4 words appeared. For Buddy's next friend. Noah's hands trembled. He looked toward Susan. She slowly nodded. I've never opened it. Neither had Henry. The little piece of paper rested quietly in Noah's hands. It was no larger than a postcard. Its edges had softened with age. The fold lines were worn white from time. Yet, it had never been opened. Not by Susan, not by Walter, not even by Henry Collins. For 12 long years, he had kept his promise. The room became silent. Walter removed his cap. Susan folded her hands together. Even the children reading nearby seemed unusually quiet, almost as if the little letter deserved its own moment. Noah looked toward Buddy. The little bear rested peacefully on the table, his patched ear, his faded fur, his tiny red scarf knitted by Elizabeth. Everything about him carried memories. Yet, this letter belonged to the future, not the past. With careful hands, Noah unfolded the paper. The handwriting was uneven. Several words were misspelled. The letters leaned in different directions. It was unmistakably written by a child. Across the very top, Lucas had written in blue crayon, "Dear Buddy's next best friend." Noah smiled through tears. Then he began reading aloud. "Hey, if you're reading this, that means Buddy likes you now." Emma, who had stopped by after school, quietly sat beside Susan. She listened without moving. "My name is Lucas. I'm 7. Buddy sleeps next to me every night. He is really good at listening." A few children in the reading corner smiled. One little girl hugged her own stuffed rabbit a little tighter. Sometimes grown-ups think stuffed animals can't hear. They're wrong. Buddy hears everything. Walter laughed softly. "That sounds exactly like him." Susan nodded. He truly believed it. Noah continued. "If you're scared, tell Buddy. If you're lonely, tell Buddy. If you're sad, tell Buddy. He never gets tired." Noah paused for a moment. His voice had become difficult to steady. The next sentence had been erased once, then written again, as though Lucas had changed his mind before finally deciding what he wanted to say. Sometimes people cry when they think nobody is looking. Buddy still looks. Emma quietly wiped away a tear. She remembered nights after her father's death, when she had hidden beneath her blanket so her mother wouldn't hear her crying. She whispered, "I wish I'd known Buddy then." Noah smiled gently. "I think Grandpa hoped someone like you eventually would." He continued reading. "Mr. Henry says brave people are not people who never cry. Brave people keep loving anyway." Susan closed her eyes. She remembered Henry saying those exact words to dozens of children. Again and again. Lucas's letter continued. "One day, you won't need Buddy anymore. That's good. It means you're getting stronger. When that happens, please don't keep him forever. Find another kid. Maybe one who doesn't smile very much. Maybe one who sleeps with the lights on. Maybe one who thinks nobody sees them." Emma looked toward Noah. Those last words sounded strangely familiar, almost like the letter Henry had once written for her. Noah noticed it too. Perhaps Henry had learned something from Lucas that stayed with him for the rest of his life. Near the bottom of the page, Lucas had drawn 2 stick figures. One small, one tall. Between them, Buddy. All 3 were holding hands. Above the drawing, he had written, "Nobody walks alone if somebody remembers them." Walter quietly whispered, "I've never seen that." Susan smiled. Neither had Henry. Everyone looked at one another in surprise. "What do you mean?" Noah asked. Susan pointed toward the folded paper. Henry promised Lucas he would only open the letter when Buddy found the next child. "So Grandpa never read it?" Susan slowly shook her head. He said, "Some words belong to tomorrow, not today." Noah carefully folded the letter again. His hands trembled, not from sadness, from gratitude. The little bear had carried more than cotton stuffing. He had carried hope, waiting patiently for another frightened heart. That evening, Noah returned home with Buddy resting beside him in the passenger seat. Snowflakes drifted softly across the windshield. He drove more slowly than usual, almost afraid to disturb the silence. Back inside Henry's house, Emma helped place Buddy on the old writing desk. The warm desk lamp cast a gentle glow across the little bear's face. For a long moment, no one spoke. Finally, Emma asked the question everyone had been avoiding. "So, who is Buddy waiting for?" Noah looked toward Henry's photograph hanging on the wall. The old smile seemed almost alive in the warm light. "I don't know, but Grandpa always seemed to find people, exactly when they needed him." David walked into the room carrying several boxes that had been delivered earlier that afternoon. Mail for the writing room. Most were donations. Books, paper, pens, handmade cards. One envelope, however, looked different. There was no return address. Only Henry Collins Foundation name, carefully written across the front. Inside, they found a thank you note from Fairview Children's Hospital. Attached was a small invitation. Children's Courage Day. Saturday. Everyone. Welcome. At the bottom, Susan had added one handwritten sentence. "There's a little boy I'd like you to meet." Nothing more. No explanation. No name. Emma smiled. "You think?" Noah looked toward Buddy. The little bear seemed almost ready to leave the desk after all those years. He gently touched the patched ear, then whispered, "I think someone is waiting. Outside." Snow continued falling across Fairview. Inside, for the first time in 12 years, Buddy's journey was about to begin again. Saturday morning arrived, wrapped in soft winter sunshine. The snow from earlier in the week had begun to melt, leaving tiny streams of water running along the sidewalks of Fairview. Inside the children's hospital, volunteers hurried through the hallways carrying balloons, games, books, and trays of homemade cookies. A colorful banner stretched across the lobby. Children's Courage Day. It wasn't a fundraiser. It wasn't a publicity event. It was simply one day each year, dedicated to celebrating every child who had shown courage in ways most people would never see. Susan greeted Noah at the entrance with a warm smile. Buddy rested carefully inside Noah's satchel. "You came." Noah laughed. "I don't think Grandpa would have forgiven me if I missed today." Susan looked toward the satchel. "I think someone else has been waiting even longer." The hospital felt different today. Music drifted softly through the corridors. Children painted ornaments. A magician entertained a small crowd. Therapy dogs wandered happily from room to room. For a few precious hours, illness wasn't the center of attention. Childhood was. Walter walked over carrying 2 cups of hot chocolate. Perfect timing. He handed one to Noah. "I've been looking for you. You mentioned someone I should meet." Walter nodded slowly. "I did. But don't expect much conversation." He led Noah toward a quieter hallway overlooking the hospital garden. Near one of the windows, a small boy sat alone. No older than 8, dark brown hair, oversized blue hoodie, jeans that were slightly too short, a pair of worn sneakers. His eyes remained fixed on the snow outside. He didn't notice anyone approaching. Walter lowered his voice. "His name is Ethan Parker." "What happened?" Walter sighed gently. 3 months ago. His father died in a construction accident." Noah's heart sank. "He hasn't spoken since." Walter continued. "Not to doctors, not to nurses, not even to his mother. The only movement Ethan made was pulling an old gray blanket a little closer around himself. It looked faded. The edges had frayed. One corner had been repaired several times by hand. "My dad's blanket," Susan whispered. "His mother says Ethan won't sleep without it." Noah understood immediately. Everyone grieves differently. Some cry. Some become angry. Some become silent. Ethan had chosen silence. Susan quietly added, "He still hears everything. He simply doesn't answer." Noah watched the boy for several moments. He remembered Henry sitting patiently in this very hospital years ago, waiting, never forcing conversation, never demanding smiles, only offering company. Without saying anything, Noah walked to a nearby chair, not beside Ethan, not across from him, just close enough to share the same window. He sat down, looking outside, exactly as Ethan was doing. 5 minutes passed. Neither of them spoke. 10 minutes. Still nothing. Walter smiled quietly from down the hallway. He learned from Henry. Susan nodded. He remembered. Children laughed somewhere behind them. A balloon floated past. Someone dropped a stack of coloring books. Life continued all around them, yet inside the quiet little corner, nothing felt rushed. After nearly 20 minutes, Ethan moved for the first time, very slightly. His eyes drifted toward Noah's satchel, specifically toward Buddy's tiny patched ear sticking out from beneath the zipper. Noah noticed, but he pretended not to. Another minute passed. Then, very carefully, Ethan pointed, not at Noah, at Buddy. Noah smiled. Without speaking, he slowly lifted the little bear from the satchel. Buddy sat comfortably on Noah's lap, facing Ethan. Still, neither of them spoke. After another long moment, Noah gently moved Buddy's paw, making the little bear wave. Just once. To Noah's surprise, Ethan blinked. Then, the smallest change appeared. Not quite a smile. Not yet, but something close. Noah remembered Henry's Thursday club. Instead of speaking as himself, he spoke softly in Buddy's voice. Hi, I'm Buddy. I heard this window has the best view. Ethan looked at the bear, not at Noah. Only Buddy. Buddy continued. I've been scared before, too. Silence. I don't like sleeping alone. Ethan's fingers tightened around the old blanket. I had a friend once, Buddy whispered. He held my paw every night. For the first time, Ethan's eyes filled with tears. Noah stopped talking. Henry had taught him something important. Sometimes, the next words belong to the child, not the adult. Nearly a full minute passed. Then, something almost impossible happened. Very slowly, Ethan reached one hand forward. His fingers touched Buddy's worn paw, exactly where years of tiny hands had rubbed the fabric smooth. The little boy closed his eyes, as though recognizing something familiar. His lips trembled. Finally, a whisper escaped, so soft Noah almost missed it. Hey. Susan covered her mouth. Walter quietly wiped his eyes. One nurse standing nearby froze completely. It was the first word Ethan had spoken. In more than 3 months, no one celebrated. No one applauded. Henry would have hated that. Instead, everyone pretended nothing unusual had happened, protecting the fragile moment. Buddy remained quietly in Ethan's hands. The little boy gently traced the stitched ear, then looked up at Noah for the first time. His voice was barely audible. Did he get hurt? Noah smiled warmly. Yes, but someone loved him enough to fix him. Ethan nodded slowly, almost as if that answer made perfect sense. A few moments later, Ethan carefully placed his father's blanket over Buddy's shoulders. So, he won't be cold. Noah felt his throat tighten. He remembered Elizabeth knitting Buddy's tiny scarf years ago. Now, another child was protecting him. The promise was continuing, without anyone needing to explain it. As the afternoon drew to a close, Ethan reluctantly handed Buddy back. But before Noah could place the bear inside the satchel, the little boy quietly asked one final question. Chan, he visit again? Noah looked toward Susan, toward Walter, then toward Henry's old volunteer badge, still tucked inside his coat pocket. He smiled. I think he was hoping you'd ask. That evening, driving home through the quiet streets of Fairview, Buddy rested once again on the passenger seat. But something felt different. For the first time in years, the little bear no longer seemed to be waiting. He had found the child Henry had been searching for. When Noah arrived home, he reached into Buddy's pocket to straighten the tiny note Lucas had written. Instead, his fingers touched something he had never noticed before. Hidden deep inside the stuffing was a small cloth pouch, carefully sewn into Buddy's chest. Noah stared in surprise. He whispered softly, Grandpa, what else did you leave behind? That night, the little white house on Maple Street was unusually quiet. Outside, fresh snow shimmered beneath the porch light. Inside, only the gentle ticking of Henry Collins' old grandfather clock could be heard. Buddy rested on Henry's writing desk. The warm glow of the brass lamp bathed the little bear in soft golden light. Noah sat silently beside him. His thoughts kept returning to Ethan, to the first word the little boy had spoken. Hi. One tiny word, yet it had carried more hope than an entire conversation. Carefully, Noah picked Buddy up once more. He remembered the strange cloth pouch hidden inside the bear's chest. Henry had never done anything without purpose. If the pouch existed, it was meant to be found. David joined him carrying 2 mugs of tea. You couldn't sleep either. Noah smiled. I think Grandpa left us one last puzzle. Emma arrived a few minutes later with a notebook tucked under her arm. She had become a familiar part of the Collins home, not because she needed help anymore, but because helping others had become part of who she was. She looked at Buddy curiously. "Did you find something?" Noah nodded. "I think so," very carefully, using a tiny seam ripper from Henry's sewing kit. He loosened only 2 stitches along the inside lining Henry himself had sewn years earlier. Nothing was damaged. The old bear remained exactly as Henry had repaired him. Inside, the small cloth pouch slid gently into Noah's hand. It was wrapped with faded blue ribbon, the same color thread Henry had used on Buddy's torn ear. Emma whispered. Grandpa wanted whoever opened this to know exactly where to look. Noah untied the ribbon. Inside the pouch lay a folded cream-colored note, and something else, a tiny brass key, no larger than a house key for a child's diary. No label, no explanation. David frowned. "Okay?" Noah nodded. "But to what?" Before anyone searched for answers, Noah unfolded the note. The handwriting was unmistakable. Henry Collins. Neat, steady, gentle. Across the top, he had written, "If Buddy has reached another child, then my promise has finally been fulfilled." The room fell completely silent. Noah continued reading. "Dear Noah, if you're reading this, then you trusted your heart instead of your fear. You probably worried about giving Buddy away. So did I." A small smile appeared on David's face. "That sounds like Dad." Henry's letter continued. "For 12 years, I almost convinced myself to keep him, not because Lucas was forgotten, but because I was afraid of choosing the wrong child. A promise isn't difficult because it takes effort. A promise is difficult because it asks us to let go at exactly the right moment." Noah slowly lowered the paper. He suddenly understood. Henry hadn't been waiting because he couldn't say goodbye. He had been waiting because promises deserve patience. He read on. "If Buddy is no longer here, don't be sad. Objects are happiest when they continue serving the purpose they were created for. This little bear was never mine, not even Lucas. He has always belonged to whichever frightened child needed him most." Emma quietly wiped away a tear. She whispered, "So Buddy never really belonged to anyone." David smiled gently. He belonged to hope. Henry's next paragraph felt almost like he was sitting beside them. "Noah, you'll be tempted to protect memories by locking them away. Don't. A memory hidden inside a box slowly becomes history. A memory shared becomes someone else's courage." Noah closed his eyes. He remembered the wooden box in the attic. Henry had never intended Buddy to stay there forever. The box had only been a place of waiting, never a destination. The letter continued. "When Buddy leaves this house, do not think of it as losing him. Think of it as watching kindness find another address." Emma smiled. Another address. Just like the letter. Henry had spent his entire life believing kindness should keep traveling, never staying in one place too long. At the bottom of the page, his handwriting became slightly larger. Perhaps his hands had begun to tremble with age. "There is one final gift inside this pouch. Not for Buddy. For you." Noah looked back inside. Only the tiny brass key remained. He picked it up carefully. Henry had tied a narrow paper tag around it, so faded it was almost impossible to read. Emma held it closer to the lamp. Very slowly, the words appeared. "Library Drawer 7. Susan." The library. Henry's favorite place. David looked surprised. "I've never heard of Drawer 7. Neither had Noah. The mystery wasn't over. Henry had one final destination waiting. The following morning, Noah drove to the Fairview Public Library. Buddy rested on the passenger seat. This time, not inside the satchel, not hidden, simply sitting beside him, as though traveling exactly where Henry intended. Clara Bennett greeted him with her familiar smile. Then she noticed the tiny brass key. Her expression changed immediately. She whispered, "So, he finally trusted someone with it. You know this key?" Noah asked. Clara nodded slowly. "I've been keeping that drawer locked for almost 12 years. She led Noah toward Henry's favorite reading corner. Behind the old librarian's desk stood a narrow oak cabinet with dozens of tiny numbered drawers. Most held index cards from years before the library had become digital. At the very bottom, one small brass plate read, "Tea, Clara smiled sadly. Henry told me, one day my grandson will come. When he does, don't ask questions. Just hand him the key. Noah's hands trembled as he inserted the tiny key into the lock. The drawer opened with a soft click. Inside, there was no money, no family heirloom, no valuable treasure, only a single blue notebook. Across the cover, Henry had written 4 words. Children still waiting. Noah slowly lifted the notebook. Between its pages, hundreds of handwritten names were listed. Not children who had died, not children Henry had already helped, but children who still needed someone to notice them. Some entries were years old. Others had been updated recently by volunteers Henry quietly worked with before he passed away. Each name had a short note beside it. Loves drawing. Afraid of thunderstorms. Lost her grandmother. Needs someone to read with him. Never misses Thursday club. Noah stared at the pages in disbelief. Henry hadn't built a legacy of memories. He had built a roadmap for future kindness. Buddy had never been the end of the story. He had only been the beginning. The following Thursday, Fairview Children's Hospital welcomed another quiet winter morning. The sky was clear. Sunlight reflected softly across the snow-covered courtyard. Inside the pediatric wing, children laughed as volunteers prepared craft tables for the weekly activity hour. Everything felt ordinary. Yet Noah knew today would become one of the most important days of Buddy's journey. Buddy rested gently inside a small canvas bag. Not hidden, not forgotten, simply waiting. Beside him, Henry's blue notebook remained safely tucked beneath Noah's arm. Children still waiting. He had read every page the night before. Every child, every note, every small reminder that kindness was never finished. Henry hadn't expected Noah to replace him. He had only hoped Noah would continue noticing people. Susan greeted him at the entrance. You came early. Noah smiled. I think Grandpa would have. Susan laughed softly. He always did. Walter appeared carrying a box of puzzles for the children's recreation room. When he noticed Buddy, he gently tipped his cap. Morning, old friend. The little bear seemed almost at home here. Ethan sat in the same chair beside the garden window. The gray blanket still rested across his lap. But something had changed. Instead of staring blankly outside, he held a sketchbook, carefully drawing. Noah walked closer. Without saying a word, he sat beside him again, just as Henry always had. After a few quiet minutes, Ethan slowly turned the sketchbook around. The drawing showed 3 figures standing beneath falling snow. One little boy, one teddy bear, one elderly man wearing a long blue coat. Their hands were joined together. Noah smiled. That's beautiful. Ethan pointed toward the elderly man. That's your grandpa. Noah blinked. You've never met him. Ethan nodded. I know, but Buddy told me. Noah's eyes filled with tears. Children often explained hope in ways adults could never understand. He didn't correct Ethan. He simply nodded. I think Grandpa would have liked that. A nurse quietly wheeled a tray of books into the room. Several children gathered nearby. One little girl looked frightened before a medical procedure. She clutched her mother's hand tightly. Ethan watched silently. Then, without hesitation, he looked down at Buddy. Very gently, he whispered, I think she needs him. Noah looked at the little boy. Only a few days earlier, Ethan hadn't spoken at all. Now, his first instinct wasn't to protect himself. It was to comfort someone else, exactly as Lucas had hoped, exactly as Henry had believed. Noah slowly lifted Buddy into his hands. He looked at the patched ear, the worn paw, the tiny red scarf Elizabeth had knitted years before. Then, he remembered Henry's words. Objects are happiest when they continue serving the purpose they were created for. He took a deep breath, then knelt beside Ethan. I think it's time. Ethan looked up. What do you mean? Noah gently placed Buddy into the little boy's arms. Not for an afternoon. Not for a visit. Forever. Ethan, Buddy belongs with you now. The little boy stared in disbelief. For me. Noah nodded. He has been waiting a long time. Ethan hugged the little bear tightly against his chest. His fingers rested on the repaired ear, exactly where Lucas had once held him, exactly where hundreds of frightened children had found comfort. But, Ethan whispered, what if I break him? Noah smiled warmly. Look at Buddy. He's already been repaired many times. Love isn't about staying perfect. It's about being worth repairing. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, something extraordinary happened. Not loud, not the dramatic, just wonderfully human. Ethan smiled, a real smile. Wide, bright, the kind that reached his eyes. The first genuine smile anyone at the hospital had seen since before his father's accident. Susan quietly turned away to hide her tears. Walter removed his glasses. Even the nurses standing nearby smiled through watery eyes. No one interrupted the moment. Some things deserved silence. Ethan suddenly reached into his hoodie pocket. He pulled out a small object wrapped in tissue paper. "I made something." He handed it to Noah. Inside was a tiny knitted blue heart. Uneven, crooked, obviously made by a child's hands. "My grandma taught me," he said quietly. "I was saving it for somebody who helped me." Noah held the little heart carefully. "It's beautiful." Ethan shook his head. "No." He looked toward Buddy. "He helped me." That afternoon, children gathered in the reading corner as Noah opened one of Henry's favorite storybooks. Buddy rested comfortably beside Ethan. For the first time in years, the little bear wasn't visiting. He was home. When story time ended, the frightened little girl from earlier slowly approached Ethan. She looked at Buddy. "Can I hold him?" Ethan looked down at the old bear. For a brief moment, Noah wondered what he would say. Then Ethan smiled. The same gentle smile Henry often wore. He carefully handed Buddy to her. "He's really good at helping." The little girl hugged Buddy tightly. Within seconds, she smiled too. Walter quietly leaned toward Noah. "Did you see that?" Noah nodded. "The promise." Walter smiled. "No, the legacy." Buddy had already begun doing exactly what Lucas had hoped, exactly what Henry had waited 12 long years to see. Comfort passing from one child to another, without anyone asking, without anyone teaching, simply because kindness had become contagious. As Noah prepared to leave, Susan handed him a small envelope. "I found this tucked inside Henry's notebook after you left yesterday." Across the front, Henry had written only one sentence: "Open after Buddy finds home." Noah carefully slipped the envelope into his coat pocket. He didn't open it. Not yet. Some promises still deserved patience. Outside, the afternoon sun painted the snow with golden light. Through the hospital window, Noah glanced back one final time. Ethan sat surrounded by 3 other children. Buddy rested in the middle of them. Everyone was laughing. The little bear had already found his next family. As Noah walked toward his truck, he smiled. For the first time since opening the wooden box in the attic, he no longer felt like he was saying goodbye to Buddy. He felt like he was watching Henry keep one final promise. Spring arrived quietly in Fairview. The snow melted. The maple trees outside Henry Collins' writing room slowly turned green again. Birdsong returned to Maple Street. Life, as Henry often liked to say, always found its way back. Months passed. Ethan visited Henry's writing room every Thursday after his hospital appointments. He never came empty-handed. Sometimes he brought drawings. Sometimes homemade cookies his grandmother had baked. Sometimes he simply brought Buddy. The little bear now looked happier than ever. His fur remained worn. His patched ear still leaned slightly to one side. His red scarf had faded, but something had changed. He was no longer waiting. He was living the promise Lucas had imagined. Children visiting the writing room naturally gathered around Buddy. One afternoon, a little girl whose parents were going through a difficult divorce sat quietly in the corner. She hugged her knees tightly. She hadn't spoken all day. Ethan walked over. Without asking permission, he gently placed Buddy beside her. Then he simply smiled. "I think he likes sitting with people." That was all. 10 minutes later, the little girl began telling Buddy about her favorite teacher. No one interrupted. No one celebrated. They had learned something from Henry. Healing often begins with feeling safe enough to speak. The seasons continued changing. Summer arrived. Then autumn. Ethan grew stronger. The nightmares came less often. He slept through the night. The gray blanket his father once owned remained folded neatly on his bed, not because he still needed it every night, but because some memories deserved to stay close. Buddy slept beside it. The two never seemed very far apart. One evening, Ethan visited Noah carrying a small notebook. "I've been writing," Noah smiled. Stories? Ethan shook his head. Names. Inside the notebook, every page listed children Buddy had comforted. Sophia, Mason, Olivia, Daniel, Harper, Leo. A short note appeared beside each name. Needed courage before surgery. Mr. Mom. Scared of thunderstorms. Couldn't sleep after losing Grandpa. There were dozens, then hundreds. Noah quietly smiled. Henry's old notebook had found a new author. Years slipped by. The little boy who had once stopped speaking became a thoughtful young man. Buddy stayed with him through middle school, through high school, through college. People often asked why he still carried an old teddy bear. Ethan always answered the same way. He isn't for me. He belongs to whoever needs him next. When Ethan graduated from medical school, Noah and Emma sat proudly in the audience. Walter had become slower with age. Susan now walked with a cane. Arthur's hair had turned completely white. Yet every one of them came, because they all understood. Henry's promise had reached another chapter. On Ethan's first day as a pediatrician, he carried Buddy into his office. Not as decoration, not as a keepsake, but as a coworker. He smiled as he placed the little bear on a small wooden shelf beside the examination table. Above the shelf hung a hand-painted sign, "Borrow a friend." Beneath it, a short message read, "If today feels scary, Buddy would be honored to stay with you. When you no longer need him, let another child borrow a little courage." Parents smiled when they read it. Children understood immediately. Some hugged Buddy before blood tests. Others carried him into surgery. Many simply held his worn paw while waiting for difficult news. No forms, no fees, no questions, only trust. As the years passed, other stuffed animals quietly joined Buddy. A knitted rabbit, a little fox, a soft elephant, a tiny penguin. Every one of them had been donated by families whose children had grown stronger. Each carried a handwritten note tucked inside. Just as Lucas once had, hope had become a tradition. One snowy December afternoon, a frightened little boy arrived at Ethan's clinic. He had lost his mother only weeks before. He refused to leave his father's side. He refused to speak. Ethan recognized the silence immediately. It looked exactly like his own years earlier. He knelt beside the child, held Buddy gently, then smiled. "Hey, I'm Buddy. I heard someone here might need a friend tonight." The little boy stared for several seconds. Then, very slowly, reached for Buddy's paw. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. He could almost hear Henry laughing softly somewhere nearby. The promise was still alive. That Christmas, Noah visited the clinic. Children's drawings covered every wall. One picture caught his attention. It showed an old man, a little boy, and a teddy bear standing beneath falling snow. Above them, written in careful crayon letters, were the words, "Nobody walks alone if somebody remembers them." Lucas' sentence, still changing lives. Noah stepped outside into the cold winter air. Snowflakes drifted gently across Fairview. He looked toward the sky and smiled. "So, you did it, Grandpa." The wind stirred softly through the maple branches, almost like an answer. Later that evening, Henry Collins' writing room filled once again. Emma, now a young elementary school teacher, led a group of children writing anonymous letters of encouragement. On one table rested Henry's old fountain pen. On another, the blue notebook titled "Children Still Waiting." Its pages were no longer filled by Henry. Volunteers added new names. Teachers, neighbors, doctors, students, people who simply noticed someone having a difficult day. The notebook had become a living reminder that kindness was everyone's responsibility. Before closing for the night, Noah opened the final envelope Henry had left, the one marked, "Open after Buddy finds home." Inside, there was only one sheet of paper. Henry had written, "If you are reading this, then Buddy has already found another child. That means you finally understand something I spent my whole life learning. Kindness is never something we own. We simply hold it for a little while, until someone else needs it more." At the very bottom, one final sentence appeared, the last words Henry Collins ever wrote. "Don't ask whether the world still has good people. Become one, and someone else will believe the answer is yes." Noah carefully folded the letter. He placed it beside Henry's photograph, then quietly turned off the lamp. Outside, Snow continued falling over Fairview. Inside, the house was peaceful, not because every story had ended, but because every act of kindness had found someone willing to continue it. And somewhere across town, an old teddy bear with one torn ear rested in the arms of another frightened child, waiting patiently to help one more small heart believe that hope was never out of reach. The end. Final reflection. Some inherit money. Some inherit houses. Some inherit family names. Henry Collins left behind something far greater. He left behind the courage to notice people who felt invisible. A worn-out teddy bear. A promise kept. A little boy who learned to smile again. And a simple truth that will never grow old. The greatest gifts in life are not the things we keep. They are the things we lovingly pass on to someone who needs them more.